I feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Happy Friday. I'm sure many of you are happier this Friday than most because it's the Friday of the Memorial Day weekend. And I know Colin Donovan is happier this Friday than most because it's the Friday in advance of the Feast of Corpus Christi.
That's true. We have that Sunday and all that great coverage as we normally provide on EWTN.
They're testing the speakers around the grounds right now. Gregorian chant abounds here on the campus at EWTN right now.
Yeah, as our regular viewers know, this is an outdoor event, at least the procession part of the liturgy. So where they will get to see the broader grounds, the satellite dishes. Perhaps, I'm not sure if they'll catch those, but
I think maybe just a little glimpse in the corner here or there.
Something like that. But anyway, it is a grand occasion. Yes. I've been here for a number of Corpus Christis, and it is a grand occasion with the different altars that are set up. So please tune in.
Any chance that the viewers may see Siobhan Donovan in that procession?
No, I don't think so. We actually have Sunday plans. So,
all right. Nice to know that we're in the backseat of your life, Colin. 1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. If you've got a question for our Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, 1-800-585-9396. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985. And we'll put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. Or you can send us an email, openline@ewtn.com. I'm Jack Williams. The lovely and talented Elena Rodriguez produces the program. The equally lovely and not quite as talented Matt Kubensky is your call screener. And our host, as he is every Friday, EWTN's Vice President for Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan. And Colin, other than bailing on a Sunday, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to the summer. We finally have the summer weather, so
it's warmed up. There's no question about that.
We'll get tired of it by July, but for the moment, it's pleasant.
Andrea writes in, if the body of Christ is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, and only under the appearance of bread and wine, why does the church provide low-gluten communion bread? Do our bodies and blood naturally contain gluten? And that's Andrea.
Well, the theology of the Eucharist explains that, and that is this: that the Church makes a distinction between the accidents of the bread and the wine, and the substance of the bread and wine. Most Catholics are familiar with the term transubstantiation; that there is a change of substance. The substance of the bread becomes the body of Christ, and yet remains in the accidents of form. In other words, how it looks, how it tastes, how it reacts with our body, these things which are associated with the nature, but are not the nature per se, the thing per se. And likewise, with the wine, the accidents of the wine, or we might say properties today in a scientific sense of how we perceive it with our senses, and it therefore reacts with the environment around it, including with our bodies, is not changed. That's why a priest who consumes too much of the consecrated wine can experience the symptoms of alcoholism and develop alcoholism, and why the gluten that is normally contained in bread can also react with body through the accidents. So what the miracle is in the Eucharist is that the substance is no longer there, and the accidents remain unsupported by any substance, because obviously Christ is not the accidents of bread. His blood is not the accidents of wine. So you have an ongoing miracle of these accidents, as it were, suspended, unattached to the substance of anything, because the substance has been changed into the body and blood of Christ. Occasionally, God performs yet another miracle. You might even say removes that miracle. And in some of the Eucharistic miracles, you actually see the underlying substance, the body and blood of Christ. And so Lanciano or Vieto and a number of places, this has occurred. That is actually where God ceases the miracle of the accidents, and now suddenly you have palpable to the senses the actual body and blood of Christ. As if God were to say to us, by faith you must believe that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. This allows the skeptic, the atheist, the agnostic, the atheist say, and the Protestants for that matter, many of them, well, Catholics are wrong that this is really, it's a symbol or it's something else. So we must believe it by faith. By faith we are made just. So the just man believes by faith, not by sight, and therefore we believe in what is in the Eucharist. And occasionally God takes that away, that accident, and we see that it really is the Eucharist, and those are very profound moments. So it's possible to react to the gluten in the bread, so you can get non-gluten breads, and those can be used for hosts for those who have that medical condition, and for those who are, say, alcoholics, such as priests who must receive the wine. The lay people need not. You get the whole Christ in either species. But in their priestly communion, they must receive both species. There is mustum, which is new wine. It's essentially fermentation has begun and it has been stopped so that it doesn't develop to the point where the body can react as an alcoholic's body would to the presence of the alcohol, even though there is some alcohol in mustum. So that's why the accidents remain, and we can still detect them and experience them in all their forms, but it is body and blood of Christ, and that is what is, we believe, by faith.
Seth is watching on YouTube in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he says, let's say that Mother Angelica is canonized. What do you think she would be the patron saint of?
Perhaps co-saint, co-patron of television with St. Clare. That would be a fitting thing. And certainly I think of evangelization generally because, and that may be the higher and more important thing, because if you think about it, one of the principles that Mother operated by and which EWTN continues to operate by is that evangelization should make use of all possible instruments. And that means radio, TV, Facebook, press, everything. And this is why we have continued to move into new areas, into the new media, and so on. So maybe just of evangelization in some general way. Of course, the questioner jumps the gun a little bit. There's a 5-year waiting period before a cause can be opened. Certainly people are thinking of this, and we're already getting mail from people who've said, I prayed for something and I had this miraculous healing, or I experienced healing. There are obviously technical aspects of all of that medically and theologically, but people are already manifesting that Mother is interceding on their behalf. So we're a good deal from even opening a cause in terms of time, but I, for one, believe that day will come.
I think she'll be the patron saint of the ridiculous.
She could very well be, and she'll get her fishing nets and she'll go fish and rely on the Lord, and that's how she'll catch them.
Just getting started on an open line Friday. Colin Donovan, our Vice President for Theology, is in the house. If you've got a question for Colin, the number's 1-800-585-9396. Toll free anywhere in North America. Open line Friday with Colin Donovan.
I hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy your family, love God, go to Mass.
We remember those who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. Keep in your mercy those men and women who have died in the cause of freedom and bring them safely into your kingdom of justice and peace, Lord.
I'm Brian Patrick with Morning Glory, and as we remember those who have fought and died for our freedom, giving the ultimate sacrifice, we also remember those still on the battlefield, on ships across the globe. We thank God for the courage and the dedication of our armed forces, especially those who have given that ultimate sacrifice. We look to God in heaven and our Blessed Mother and thank them and ask them to provide us with the gratitude that we have for those who have served us. We thank those who fight for our freedom every day and for that freedom we enjoy. Have a blessed and safe Memorial Day weekend from all of us at Morning Glory and EWTN Radio.
From EWTN News Nightly in Washington, D.C., I'm Catherine Seltner with an EWTN Newslink. President Obama becomes the first sitting U.S. leader to visit the site of the first atomic bombing. Obama laid a wreath this morning at the Peace Memorial Park at Hiroshima, where the U.S. dropped a nuclear bomb in 1945. ISIS terrorists seized at least 6 villages from Syrian rebels near the Turkish border. The advances reportedly forced the evacuation of a crucial hospital and cut off a key supply route between 2 Syrian cities. A new poll suggests 25% of voters under 30 would vote for Donald Trump if he faced off against Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders remains the favorite among millennials, but the poll shows some are taking a serious look at Trump. And 2 Dominican priests set off for a nearly 500-mile pilgrimage from New Orleans, Louisiana to Memphis, Tennessee this weekend. Join us this evening for EWTN News Nightly.
How do you honor Mary during the month of May? Share your photos and stories with us. Email communications@EWTN.com and we'll post as many as possible on our social media sites.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
We hope you have a tremendous Memorial Day weekend, and be sure to take some time out of your day to at least pray for those who have gave the ultimate sacrifice for us to be able to do Open Line Friday here on EWTN. Colin?
We have all of our freedoms we didn't get our freedoms from those who served in our armed forces, but we certainly owe them a great deal of thanks for preserving our freedoms and for defending our country as they have over the years. My father included, and I myself am a veteran. So did you serve?
I did not.
You did not. So yeah, you were probably on some radio somewhere.
There was a radio exemption back in the day.
Was that what got you out? Okay. Well, some people also had the luck of the draw, and as I think you once told me, you had a high number in the drafts. So
yeah,
I had a low
that.
number.
I think I was in line for submarine service, and I proved to be too tall. So.
Yeah. Well, you can also be too short because there are knee knockers on ships. So you probably could have gotten out on a lot of grounds.
To the phones we go. yeah. We can't mention the grounds that would keep me out of the military on this program, Colin. To the phones we go. Our leadoff hitter today is Keith, driving through the great state of Kentucky, listening on the EWTN app. Keith, thanks for holding on. You're on with Colin.
All right, thanks. Hello, Colin. Hello, Jack. Happy Memorial Day weekend to you both.
And to you, Keith.
I too am a veteran, so thanks for all that y'all are doing and saying for those that are serving and those who've given their lives.
Amen.
Important thing to remember. Okay, so my question is, since we know from Scripture and from tradition that the angels waged battle, that's where Lucifer and the fallen angels went. My question is for, on the theology side, if angels are spiritual beings with no bodies, how do they wage battle?
Yeah, and that's a good question because there were the arguments actually in the early church. Some of the fathers thought the angels must have some materiality to them. Probably in part because we do know that there was the war raging, Michael and the others throwing the stars down from heaven, as in the book of Revelation, generally understood to be the casting out of the devil from the angelic heaven, not from the presence of God per se, but from the heavenly state in which they were created. The angels, if we can think about what we know about how we interact with the angels, you can sort of get the idea. An angel or a bad guy can't make us do something, okay? But they can exercise a certain amount of influence on us. One is to give us ideas. There's spiritual, and idea is a spiritual thing. It's a general thing. It's not particular, tied to matter. A spiritual idea, an idea can be put in the mind of another spiritual being, human or angelic. And in fact, St. Thomas Aquinas speaks of how the angels communicate among themselves with ideas. In other words, some back and forth. So when they influence us, they have a leverage that they don't have on other angels, and that is, although they can't force our will or force our minds to accept as true something that they present to us, they can work on our nervous system, which is material. So this is what we find in oppression and possession, is the fallen angels work on the material element of us in order to co-opt the freedom of will, because we're a mixed being, and so influencing us in our matter can influence us in how we act and how we think as we respond to pain and suffering and the difficulties we encounter in the flesh. They don't have that leverage with each other. But each angel's will and intellect is powerful in a particular species or way. St. Thomas says all the other angels are differentiated by that degree of knowledge and will, or in the case of the good angels, the degree of charity between them, which is union with God in their will. And so they have a certain spiritual force they can exercise. Now, this is not a perfect analogy by any means, but you can sort of compare it to when you see Darth Vader in Star Wars sort of mentally forcing an individual, forcing their body to do something because of the force of his mind acting. The bad angels can do that, and in the same way they can exert a spiritual force on each other. And so it would have to be, although we certainly don't have all of the story here, it would have to be some kind of spiritual force and constraint which Michael and the other angels who operate in battle fairly constantly, we must imagine, with the fallen angels, that they're able to exert that upon them. Either that or God himself is doing it and constraining them. We know the devil is constrained. He's not allowed to do everything that he could possibly do. How God or the angels that are stronger than the devil accomplishes that, we're not quite sure. But if it's on the side of the fallen, good angels versus the fallen, we would think it must be some kind of a spiritual constraint exercised by a stronger will against a weaker will.
1-800-585-9396 is your ticket to the program. Next up is Andrew in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, listening to EWTN Radio on the Lam. Andrew, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hi.
Hello, Andrew.
So, I just had a question about Mary and some of the blessings she received at her birth. Now, I know that we lost a great many things through the fall, and that Jesus, when he died, gave us a great many of those things back. From what I've been taught, concupiscence wasn't one of those things. And when Mary was born, she received at her birth what Jesus gave back to her at his death through the grace of God, so that she could be perfect enough to contain him. One of those things I've heard is that she received, or she was protected from concupiscence. But we don't have that gift. Is there some theology behind why she received that and we didn't?
Yeah.
Or if that's even true?
Yeah. It was basically true, but let me clarify a couple points. What distinguishes, if we want to make two parallels between Adam and Eve as they're created and Adam and Eve after they fell, that would be one parallel. The other parallel would be between Mary and Jesus, Mary at her conception and Jesus at his incarnation, according to his human nature at least, and then the rest of us who are still born into the state of fallen state of original sin. Mary and Jesus represent the rebirth of the human race. So it was absolutely necessary, even ontologically, and that is on philosophical grounds of the nature of being and the nature of the human person and so on, that Mary be conceived without original sin. And how is this done? In the same way that Adam and Eve were created without original sin, by infusing into Adam and then Eve, and then, of course, Mary subsequently, not only the human soul that occurs with all of us, but simultaneously the gift of participating in his own divine life. Adam and Eve were created not incapable of sin, but in a state of perfect justice, where they were properly ordered within themselves, their senses, their intellect, their memory, their will, their imagination, all properly ordered within themselves so that they could have that integrity and unity of their human person, and then that person properly ordered to God through that indwelling of God, of the divine persons of the Trinity, and the order that now gives between God and man. So they had that. In their freedom, they lost that, and we are born into that historical state of man and woman, naturally complete, body and soul, with our faculties naturally present, intellect, will, imagination, memory, and then, of course, our sense faculties as well, our senses. But they are disordered. They're attracted to disorder because of the lack of the presence and the constituency of the grace being present in them and in us from the moment of our conception in the womb of our mothers. And therefore, concupiscence exists, meaning simply that if the intellect is darkened and the will is weaker, but the passions have not lost any of their force. They're simply natural. They're material things. They've not lost any of their force. And so they tend to rebel and seek false goods. And our intellect sometimes is happy to bless their choices, and our will happy to embrace them and run with those choices. That is what concupiscence does. Mary had the gift that Adam and Eve had, and that is that perfect integrity and justice and the indwelling of the Holy Trinity that enabled it. And as a consequence of that, and all the graces throughout her life that were present to her, together with her cooperation with those graces that allowed her to persist in grace without sin to the end of her life. Everything follows from that. Everything follows from the new creation of Mary with grace in her soul, which we call the Immaculate Conception. Every other gift and thing that she experienced was related to that and flows from it, as well as from the reason that she had that to begin with, in view of the redemption, as Pius the 12th said, and Pius the 9th before him, in view of the redemption. And so Mary and Jesus together represent the new man and woman, the new human race, which we are all called to be and are sadly a long way from becoming, at least according to the newspapers.
You often hear that the merits of Jesus and his crucifixion were applied to Mary in the womb of St. Anne, our Lord being outside of time and space. Could the same thing to any degree be said of Adam and Eve?
Well, in what way? They were created that way. So it was given to them at the moment of their redemption. In that God created them with Christ in mind, this is certainly clear. He is the image of the invisible God. Everything is related to the image of God, to the Word. All creation is a word that shows that in Genesis, and God spoke and it was done. So, yes, you could say that Adam and Eve were created in view of that perfect man, which we were all meant to be, which we are not. And Christ is that perfect man, and Mary is that perfect woman.
1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. Plenty of time for your phone calls at 1-800-585-9396. Talking theology, church teaching, scripture. Open Line Friday with our Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan.
It's new. It's Catholic. It's live from our studios at Christ Cathedral. Call Me Catholic with Peggy Normandin. A full hour of talk, interviews, and commentary on faith. Celebrating, exploring, and restoring our Catholic identity in a modern world. Call Me Catholic every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
I'm Raymond Arroyo with Mother Angelica, A Remarkable Life. In the year 1943, when Mother Angelica was 20 years old, she had been healed of a stomach ailment and began to undertake the pious practice of praying the Stations of the Cross. She would do so right here at St. Anthony's Church every day after work. Following the Stations, she retired to a side altar, knelt down, and said a prayer of thanksgiving before a statue of Our Lady of Sorrows, much like the one behind me. It was here where she would receive her vocation and her call to the religious life. Stay with EWTN as we continue to celebrate the life and legacy of Mother Mary Angelica.
Get an insider's look at the latest information from EWTN. Sign up for Wings, EWTN's weekly email newsletter. Get the latest information about live events, special features, and guests. Connect with EWTN on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Just go to EWTN.com and click on the Wings link to sign up. Don't miss a minute of all that's happening at EWTN. Get your wings today.
This is Bishop William Medley of the Diocese of Owensboro.
This is Al Cresta, host of Cresta in the Afternoon.
Hi, I'm Archbishop William Laurie, the Archbishop of Baltimore, and you're listening to EWTN Radio.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Keep it right here. Many of these EWTN-affiliated radio stations will have Cresta in the Afternoon as soon as we're finished. Direct to My Desk, great shows when Al kind of answers some of the questions that come across his desk over time, and the phones will be open, and you can call and ask Al a question as well. That's 4 Eastern. And then 2 hours of Catholic Answers live tonight, starting at 6 Eastern. Rylene Simpson in hour number 1, talking about parents of children who experience same-sex attraction. And Dan Matson will be in the second hour, and he'll talk about the gay identity. That's at 6 p.m. Eastern on Catholic Answers Live. And then tonight at 8 Eastern, Life on the Rock. Founder and creative director of Likeable Art, Corey Hyman, and I've seen some of the stuff he does. It is fantastic. So be sure to tune that in tonight, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television, Life on the Rock. Back to the phones we go. Ken is in Alden, Minnesota, listening to EWTN on Sirius XM Channel 130. Kent, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, Kent.
Hello?
Are you there? Go ahead.
Hi. I was curious. I have a question about the sacrament of penance and its roots in the Jewish Old Testament. I know that some of the ritual around the sacraments has changed as time goes on, and then different customs get added. But I'm particularly curious about the verbal confession of sins in the sacrament of penance, and how to link that up to the Jewish idea of atonement, how it's changed.
Yeah. In the Old Testament, there were the various sin offerings that had to be made. As I understand it, that involved a actual confession of sin. In fact, many of the medieval rabbis talk about the necessity of the oral confession of sin. I don't know if maybe they're taking a hint but they're interpreting the Torah and the Talmud and that in doing it. So I'm sure I think that has a long history in Judaism. So you actually have this idea, and the argument they give is pretty much the same that you will find in Catholic authors, and that is, it's fine to say to God in privacy, well, I'm sorry I sinned and I not going to do it again. There's nothing fixes our resolve as confessing orally to another person, whether it's the priest in the temple under the old law or whether it's the priest in the confessional under the new. And psychologically, this is very, very true, I think, and Catholics experience this all the time. The relief and also the desire to fulfill that promise. A sacrament, the name for the sacrament comes from a Latin word sacramentum, which had the idea of a vow contained in it. It was what the legionnaire made, making a vow to the emperor. And the sacraments became a kind of a vow we make to God. We bind ourselves by vow in baptism. That's confirmed in confirmation, of course, by the form of the Eucharist. The bread and the wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ by our confession of sins orally in the sacrament of penance. We receive forgiveness. It's not a me and Jesus thing. And if there's one message which the Old Testament is clear on, and it's always baffled me that non-Catholics didn't see this, and that is the Old Testament was the journey of a people with rituals, with a sense of who they are, with a physical identity, with sacramental signs, even though they didn't have the force of that the New Covenant sacraments have. That's the message of the entire Old Testament, of the Mosaic Law, what God was preparing and foreshadowing about the New Covenant. So the Jewish roots of the sacraments, of the Liturgy of the Hours, of the Mass, as we talked about recently in a program, Louis Bouillet and others who have written on the connection between the elements of the Mass and the elements of this prayer used in the sacrificial offerings in the temple, as well as in the Liturgy of the Word, which the Levites conducted while the sacrifices were going on, in the synagogue service, in the Sabbath meal and prayers and so on. All of this was preparatory, but they pointed to a reality of Christ fulfilling these things in a unique way and in a mysterious and even unseen way, just as his messiahship itself was mysterious and really unpredicted by the apostles, who thought it would be triumphant kingly entry into the city and the smashing of the Romans. Well, that's not the kind of kingship he had in mind. But all the elements were there, it's just being wrongly interpreted. So this is, I think, where the Catholic roots of confession are. I think it's witnessed to in the rabbis in their own explanation of the temple rites, as well as the purpose and the value of oral confession and so on. Although they do not attribute what we attribute to it, the restoration of justice in the soul by virtue of the blood of Christ and the merits of the redemption.
Is that helpful, Kent?
It's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
We appreciate the phone call. That frees up a line for you at 1-800-585-9396. To Texas we head. Tony's in San Antonio listening on Guadalupe Radio. Tony, thanks for holding. You're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello,
Tony, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, Tony, go right ahead.
I was raised Catholic, and in fact, I took my first communion here in San Antonio at San Fernando Cathedral, and but here in the last few years, I went to Protestant route, and I'm very confused about that since I've been listening to EWTN for the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I come out here in my car and sit, and in the mornings usually, and I listen. I don't know. I'm very confused about that. I became a Christian, not in the Catholic Church, but not in the Protestant Church either. But anyway, and the guy laid hands on me.
Sure.
But the thing is, I'm very torn between that.
Mm-hmm.
And all you guys have explained it. And Catholic Church is by far the first church that Christ established. And I'm beginning to believe that 100%.
Yeah.
But I'm still torn between, the Protestant denominations and I go to them from time to time. Now I'm beginning to feel guilty about that.
Yeah. Well, nobody is saying that there's not value there. I mean, they praise God, they sing hymns to God, they read the scriptures, they give a sermon, and so on.
And most importantly, they oftentimes take more of an interest in your personal relationship with Jesus than we as Catholics do sometimes.
That's true. I think it's a case where economy of scale in the church doesn't work, because we have economy of scale. We have priests that can, tend in some sense to 1.5 billion people, but maybe not tend to them on the individual level the way that in a Protestant church. We have a number of the big mega churches here in Birmingham can, with their various ministries, and also because they have lay ministries. I think the addition of permanent deacons to the church at Vatican II has expanded the possibility of the church to do that, and to have this more personal service in different apostolates of charity that assist married couples, prisoners, the sick, and so on and so forth. So that's been a great add. But yeah, basically, I think I understand what your point is. But I think you have to look at it rather dispassionately. You have to look at it as where the truth is. The truth should lead to instruction, sermons, teaching, which is in agreement with that truth. And not just agreement now, 2016 in Birmingham, Alabama, but agreement with somebody who holds that same faith, who maybe lives in Nairobi, Kenya, right now in 2016, or who lived in Carthage in the 4th century AD, or who lives in the underground church in China today, or in the old Soviet Union, was in the Gulag, or in medieval times. The Catholic Church offers the fact that always and everywhere since Christ, although there has been a development of teaching, Christian teaching has remained the same wherever in time or place you encounter the church. Yes, an individual priest can go off the beam, and catechist or whoever. But as for what is the true teaching of the church in every time and place, it will be found to be the same. It will be the same sacraments. And like the Jewish people representing the covenant of God with the human race, with the Jews in particular at Sinai, and they have that visible unity, the Catholic Church has that visible unity. It's the same church that was in 4th century Africa, that was in 1st century Jerusalem and Rome, and all the places that St. Paul went, and where St. Thomas went to India. So this visible unity I was talking about with regard to the sacrament of confession, whereby what God had prepared in the Old Covenant is now found fulfilled in the New. Did he prepare a visible body of Israel and now only have an invisible church where you can believe differently in different times and places, where you can apply the redemption in a variety of different ways that are not consistent, where the leadership, the pastors, the overseers, the elders, the deacons of the church are in communion with each other around the world and in every time and place? I think he did. I think he left us a consistent instrument. It's a human instrument, which explains all the foibles of Catholics in every time and place as well. But it's that visible instrument of unity that God wished the human race to have. And so that's the choice that's being offered to you. You can get truth when you go to that Protestant church, but you may also get error regarding, say, the prosperity gospel, if they happen to preach it there, regarding, say, the need for oral confession that we talked about earlier in the show. You can get truth but mixed with error. You get truth in the Catholic Church not mixed with error. And you get the sacraments Christ left us, and you get the overseers, the bishops, the elders, the priests, the servants, the deacons, that were instituted in the first century and have been in existence ever since, even though they too are human beings and they have all the faults of human beings, they still represent Jesus to us as the fallible apostles of the first century did. So that is the advantage. So I'd say just come home and you'll not regret it.
Thanks so much for that phone call. We'll stay in the Republic of Texas. Mary is listening to EWTN Radio in Texas. Mary, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, Colin. I have a question regarding deacons. I know a man, he's near 50 years old, theology degree, works for the diocese, very knowledgeable about the faith, very good man, but he has been told that since he participated in procuring an abortion when he was a teenager, he can never be ordained to the permanent diaconate. Is that indeed canon law?
It certainly has historically been the practice. A man who had killed another man, another human being, could not be ordained to the priesthood. The permanent diaconate is a new thing. I'm not sure whether that applies directly, but the principle is certainly a long-standing one in the church. And abortion, of course, is the killing of a person, human being. And so that what the practice is, I can't tell you. I'm not involved in that, and I'm not sure whether it's specifically stated. But certainly with regard to the priesthood, it would be a general prohibition. And general prohibitions don't exclude the possibility of exception. There have been some exceptions in the past to those kinds of things. There have been general enforcement of it. There's a famous case of a man who's now a blessed. Basically, he could be a blessed and a saint, but he couldn't be a priest. And everybody told him this. He had been involved in Satanism and came out of it and became very active and evangelistic. And he was told by the bishop he couldn't. He was told by religious communities he couldn't. So he went and he talked to the Pope, and this was about 140, 50 years ago. And the Pope just, told him to be content and to go and do good. And he ended up founding a Marian shrine. So this is a general rule of prudence. The priest must be able to not. I would say it's on this level. If a priest has a fault or a history which would scandalize the people, generally that's considered a delict, detriment, and is not easily overcome and probably requires some kind of special permission. That could be, like the gentleman I was talking about, that could be being involved in the occult. That could be maybe drug abuse. I have thought the number of priests who have fallen away because being former drug abusers who go back to that and fall off the bandwagon, there was some imprudence there on the part of those who ordained them. Should they not have been maybe considering some of these things? So I think that it is a prudential rule, but sometimes in remarkable circumstances, those can be set aside. So it's something he could certainly ask about if he's sincerely interested. And I think if a person feels that they are being called, they should ask and maybe not take that first no. But after you get a succession of no's, then be at peace. That's not what God is calling you to do.
Next stop, Houston, Texas. You're number one in Texas today, Colin. Nathan is in Houston, listening to EWTN on Guadalupe Radio. Nathan has a fantastic question. Nathan, what's your question for Colin?
My question is, when Cain killed Abel and God put this mark on his face so that people could recognize him and wouldn't harm him, and he also went off and had kids, if Adam's family was the only family there, how was that possible? And another question, I have a minister that constantly says that he keeps the Ten Commandments and he doesn't sin. So is that possible?
Well, not as he phrases it, because that's a contradiction in the same sentence. You're either keeping the that would be a contradiction. You can't both keep the Ten Commandments. I guess you can, and he never sins. I would say that that's remarkable grace. Even among the canonized saints, there are a few cases where confessors have said that to their knowledge they never committed a mortal sin. So that's possible. As for the mark of Cain, we don't actually know. Some have speculated that there was tattooing in the ancient world, and therefore some kind of tattoo on the face or mark on the face, sort of like the scarlet A in the story. The A for adultery in the story of Puritan times, the Scarlet Letter. What it was, I don't know. I think perhaps a tattoo makes sense. As for other kids, well, you have to remember, if you read a history book about the United States, it's not excluding the existence of Kenya or China or other places. So when you're looking at the Bible, it's not giving you a history of the world in the sense that you would pick up a history book per se. It's talking about the line of patriarchs that lead to Abraham, that lead to David, that lead to Christ. So, therefore, there were other people in the world. Now, that being said, the church acknowledges, and many theologians have said, whom married who. They were all, at least in the first generation, they were all sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. So he married one of his sisters, would be the answer. It's just that we're not told whom he married. We're not given any of that information. But if the human race is united in Adam and Eve, if Eve is truly the mother of all the living, which is what we believe and what the Bible says, then all human beings are united by being the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. That being the case, we are more united than we are divided, and we should always keep that in mind, that racial, religious, and other divisions, even if we disagree on, say, transsexualism or same-sex marriage, these are our fellow human beings, and we're more united to them than we are divided on this point of morality. And so this is the evil of the Nazi system, in part, was that they postulated the superiority of Aryans against other races. Well, no, you can't be superior if you're all sons and daughters of the same two fallen human beings. So Cain married his sister, and Thomas Aquinas and many others say that at that time, because they were the creation of God, there was none of today we would say genetic issues. Then that's not the way, of course, they thought in medieval times. But the medical issues that resolved from close family marriages didn't occur at the beginning of the human race, and therefore that was possible. If you and your sister were the last two human beings on the face of the earth, you could morally repopulate the earth. To even today, this is discussed among the theologians as well, that those exigent circumstances can be exceptions to the moral law at the beginning or at a new beginning. Think of the children of Noah.
Exactly.
Oh, here's another example. We all come from the children of Noah. Where did the other wives and people come from? No, they came from among that first group. So,
or else they were really good swimmers.
Or they were very good swimmers. Or they cling very well to mountaintops, maybe.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the phone call, Nathan. 1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. That's the number Trish used in Seattle, Washington, listening to EWTN on Sacred Heart Radio. Trish, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. A friend of mine is sort of going through a crisis of faith, and I'm a Carmelite, and he's asked me this question. I don't have an answer. And his wife is suffering from cancer, and in answer to the suffering question, he's done some studying, and we've talked about relating our sufferings with Christ to God for the redemption of all of us and that kind of thing. But he sent me some information. I don't think it's Catholic. He had me read it, and basically it said back to a reason for God not being the great God that he is. It said something to the effect of, well, if God is all love and omniscient, why did he even make Adam and Eve, knowing that they would sin?
Okay.
What was the point?
Well, he could have made, we're sort of running out of time, so you better let me dive into it here. He could have made a race of robots who mechanically did everything right at every time, and we may see that created here in the future with the development of robotics. But that's not what he did. He created free creatures. What would be the gift of life and existence to creatures if they didn't have the freedom to choose good? The freedom to choose good comes with the flip side of the freedom to choose evil. So in order to create a person like himself, like the divine nature, intellect and will, there was always the possibility of sin. In order to create the angels, he knew very well what would happen. But what happened? 2/3 of the angels didn't do that, and only 1/3 did. So all of the blessings that we have, those of us who love God, who acknowledge God, who will reap the benefits of loving God and doing good to others, the saints with their great works of charity and so on, all of that comes from their freedom, not from a mechanistic idea of morality that says, well, there's obligation. There is obligation there. But virtue is a greater thing than obligation. If we want an obligatory, we want obligation, then you go to a police state. This is what the liberals want to create. It's also what Calvin created in Geneva. But the liberals want to create it in the United States to force their civil morality on the United States. That is a robotic system. A free system allows people the freedom of their conscience, which means that they're going to make mistakes and they're going to do evil. God did that. And the church at Easter has that beautiful prayer of the Exultet, O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam, which gave us so great a Redeemer. We could not have had the incarnate Jesus Christ who gave us such an example of divine love for the human race had Adam and Eve not fallen. And that's what the Exultet is telling us. And so it's our very nature to be free which made God create, which makes parents have children. By the logic which is being offered there, if our children turn out to be bad, we should be able to, let's exterminate this one. There's a bad seed. We'll get rid of it. No, that's not what love does. Love permits freedom, even when freedom leads to mistake, even when freedom leads to the greatest possible mistakes.
Colin, thanks for being so gracious with your time.
You're welcome.
On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, producer Elena Rodriguez, and our call screener, Matt Gubensky, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us on Open Line Friday. Back at it again Monday, a brand new show on Labor Day Monday with John Martinoni. We pre-recorded this show last week, but it is full of nothing but telephone calls, so it's an outstanding listen, so make sure you tune in. Until we get together next week, God bless.